foundational understanding of pain, its role in its life, complex trauma, and its effect on pain, all of those different things. So the first thing I want you to understand is that our brain hates pain, and you all know that. What is interesting to me is as they look at the brain and understand it more and more, they are finding that our brain is wired to go to pleasure. It's where it wants to live. So if it feels pain, the brain is immediately uncomfortable, restless, and starts to look for options to get rid of the pain so it can go back to pleasure. So pain was designed to be the thing it experiences very little of, and if it does experience it, quickly can get back to pleasure. That's going to be kind of interesting for some of you to digest because you grew up feeling mainly pain. So your brain was all the time out of where it wanted to be. And that might help you understand why your brain was constantly busy, looking for escapes, looking for solutions, all of those different things was very real in all of you growing up. The second thing I want you to understand is complex trauma causes you to have a distorted perspective on pain. So in your world, if you experienced pain, there wasn't a solution for it. So pain was always bad. Pain was always a negative, and nothing good ever came out of pain. That's why it was a bad thing. That is actually a very distorted understanding or perspective on pain, but to you that seems like the truth. And that's going to be important to understand moving into recovery. And then the third thing is the greater the pain you experience, the greater the trigger and escalation of adrenaline, anger, and other emotions. So complex trauma causes you to live in a world where you're getting triggered all the time by pain. But what you need to understand is the response that you had to those triggers only led to more pain. And so your whole trigger system and response to those triggers has only resulted in more pain. So it's kind of messed up too. So you got a messed up brain, a messed up perspective on pain, and a messed up trigger response system. So that's just to encourage you as we get started. Okay, what is the original purpose for pain? So think of it two ways. Number one, you get a toothache. Is the toothache there to just torment you and torture you? No, it's saying you got a problem, go fix it. So pain alerts you to something is wrong so that you can correct it and then the pain goes away. So that is a wonderful system that is designed to keep us from either destroying ourselves. Think of leprosy. I don't know if you're aware of leprosy. Leprosy is your nerves die. So that's why people's fingers fall off. So they might be asleep at night and a rat starts chewing their finger. They don't get any pain. And they wake up in the morning and their finger's gone. And they wish they had a pain system because without it, they destroy themselves without even realizing it. Second thing I want you to realize around pain is this. All of you, I think, are understanding that life, if it's going to lead to joy and happiness, has to be characterized by love. And there are boundaries around love. So you can have a healthy life where you treat people with respect, or you can cross that boundary and go into disrespect. But what you begin to realize, as soon as you go into disrespect, you get pain. And it's painful consequences. And that's not, again, to torture you. It's to make you say, I don't want to keep living like this. This is no fun. This is only leading to worse and worse pain. I want to get back inside of the love parameters, the boundaries. And so again, it is designed to motivate you to want to change your life so that it is healthy. And that is what addiction has done for many of you. It was enough pain that you finally said, I need to change my life. I can't keep living like this. So pain was designed to be a motivator, to tell you something was wrong, and to motivate you to want to get healthy again. Now let me go to complex trauma and pain. So again, pain was designed to be a good thing. So let's say as a child, you were abused, you were neglected, your needs weren't met, you were treated with disrespect. You felt a lot of pain. And everything in you says, something's wrong here, I want to fix it. But you're too little to fix it because the people causing the problems, they didn't want to change. And so you got punished for crying or getting angry or for saying this isn't right, this isn't fair. And so what you realized as a little child was there's no solution to my pain. I can't resolve it. I can't make it better. So what then were your options? I better find a way to numb my pain or avoid anything that might cause pain. That was your only solution. There were no healthy ways to resolve the pain, only unhealthy. And those were only temporary fixes. Numbing pain, avoiding pain, those didn't work long term, but those were the only options that you had. Okay, let's go to the next thing. I want you to think about types of pain. So we understand physical pain, but I think people from complex trauma understand there's a thing called emotional pain, and it probably hurts more than physical pain. And that has a whole lot of things that you've gone through. Rejection, betrayal, abandonment, grief, disrespect, shame, failure, hopelessness, and the list could go on and on. And having all of those without a solution, but having to just live within that and try to numb it, that's a lot of pain. So what I want you to understand up front is this. I don't beat you up for numbing your pain for years, because that was your only solution. So I don't want you to be saying, oh, I wished I had done it differently, and beat yourself up. You were a kid trying to survive with a lot of pain. And you had more pain than pleasure in your life. And so that was your reality, and you went to the only solution that you could find. I think there's a third type of pain, and I call it a spiritual pain. And what I mean about that is that a certain guilt and an emptiness, something is missing. That is a spiritual pain. I think that some pain, especially the spiritual, can operate at a totally subconscious level. You're not even aware that it's there unless you stop and really think. And people from complex trauma don't stop and think. They're distracting themselves to numb the pain. And so you have all this subconscious pain that is having an effect on your brain. You're just not aware of it. At times it goes to the conscious level, and that drives you even further to numbing and avoiding. But that is the pain world that you're familiar with. So let me explain a little bit more how you numbed and avoided. Some of the strategies that you use to numb and avoid. So stuffing your emotions. Now, it goes two ways with that. With extreme pain. So pain that is beyond the brain's ability to deal with. That's when a person will pass out or totally disconnect, and they will go into a dissociative state, or they block the memories. And that is severe pain. The brain's only way of surviving is to dissociate or totally shut down. And some of you have gone there. And then the other is, I just going to shut down emotionally, and what will help me do that so I don't feel is to develop a whatever attitude. So what you realize is if I care about somebody, it hurts even worse if they hurt me or if I lose them. So don't care about anything is the solution you come up with. And so you try to not care about anything and act like nothing bothers you. Now, I think you know, if you're honest with yourself, that even if you do that, at some level you still care. At some level, it still affects you. So you go to the third, which is let's have distractions. Let's keep busy all the time. Let's never sit still. Let's always be watching something, doing something, just to stay distracted. And for some of you, that meant let's keep chaos happening. Because if there's chaos, then we're busy. Because we're dealing with crisis and putting out fires. And so then we don't have time to feel the pain. Then everybody knows about the medicating. But I don't know if you realize that for many people, anger is a medication of pain. Because what happens when you're angry is you feel the powerful anger emotion, and for a moment you don't feel pain anymore. And so some people get up in the morning and they try to get angry just so they don't feel any other emotion. So that is a type of medication. Some of you thought the only way I can not get hurt and not feel pain is to totally isolate myself from all people, never get close to anybody, never let anybody close to you. Surely that will help me never to feel pain. And then you find out when you isolate, you still got to live with yourself. And you hurt yourself. Some of you went to a fantasy world. So my world here is painful and it sucks, so I will escape through my brain into creating a fantasy, and I will try to live there in my mind. And then self-harm is actually a way to try and numb emotional pain. So it goes two ways. If I feel physical pain by cutting, then I don't feel that emotional pain. Or if I cut myself, it seems to release emotional pain. What I want you to understand with that is it's a very short-term thing. It's not a true cure. It is just a temporary numbing, and it usually results in things snowballing and getting worse. So pain, you've used different ways. How do we respond to pain in a healthy way? So I want to build on kind of introduction, and over the next weeks we're going to explore healthy tools for dealing with pain. But here's the first thing I want you to understand. A lot of people coming into recovery think that they can do recovery just by living out of their head. So in their mind is, I think emotions are useless and bad. I don't want any part of emotions. So I want to just get a whole bunch of information about how to live, and then I'll have a perfect recovery. But what you have to understand is that doesn't work. It might work for a bit, but emotions will be triggered. There's all kinds of emotions that are down there below the surface that are still running the show, even though you think you're living out of the brain. And so if you're going to get good recovery, which means getting healthy, you got to start dealing with emotions. And that is just, I know, no easier way to say that. Recovery equals dealing with pain in a healthy way. So recovery isn't staying in pain forever. I'm not saying that. I'm saying recovery is beginning to deal with pain. And as I deal with it, I develop tools so that it gets resolved, so I get less and less pain as I go along, but I got to start somewhere. And I have to start dealing with it. Next thing I want you to understand is this. There's a lot of pain in recovery that you're going to be able to start to resolve, and it's going to be gone. Just like a toothache. You're going to find a solution, and that pain will be gone from your life. But there's going to be some pain that you can't magically make disappear in 5 minutes. And that's when I say you got to sit in that kind of pain for a while. Let me give you an example. Let's say that next Thursday you have a job interview. All week from now till next Thursday, your anxiety's up. You're not sleeping as well. Your brain's busy going, what happens if they ask me this? What will I do? I have the right answers, and you just go all over. And you come to me and say, make it go away. And I say, I can help you manage it, but you're going to have some anxiety right up until the interview. I can't make it disappear, all of it. So part of dealing with pain is learning when I can resolve it and when I just kind of have to sit in some of it for a while. And hopefully you'll get tools to resolve, and you'll get tools to sit in it when you need to sit in it. Third thing I want you to understand is this. A common occurrence in early recovery is your main numbing agent of all your pain is now gone because you're not using or drinking. And what people find in the first 3 months of recovery is that their emotions start to thaw out. So they used to be in freeze mode. Now the freezing is thawing. And they're starting to feel. Usually what they feel first is guilt. Then they start to get in touch with their anger and their fear. And then they go, I don't like these emotions. And it sets many people up to relapse. Because they go, if this is recovery, this is not fun. I want to start numbing again. So what I want you to understand is this. This is part of early recovery. Thawing out emotions. It doesn't last forever, but you go through a stage where you have so much pain and painful emotions that it's overwhelming at times. And so you're going to need a lot of support in those times. Next thing I want you to understand. That's just, what I just described is just your emotions thawing out. Then if you come to Finding Freedom or React, or you go to AA, two things are going to happen. You come to Finding Freedom or React, and you're going to learn you got complex trauma. And you go, that's painful. Then you go to AA, and they say you got to do a step 4, a fearless moral inventory. And you go, that's painful. It doesn't matter which path you choose in recovery, you're going to have somebody say, let's look at your pain. And they're going to actually start helping you understand things so that your pain gets bigger before it gets smaller. And so early recovery, in the first couple years of recovery, pain is something that is just there regularly in the journey. And it is part of healing and growing. It is not there just to torture you. It is there so that you would say, I got to deal with this stuff, and then you start to heal, and then you start to grow. Now the next thing comes true. You start feeling pain in recovery, you get triggered. And what gets triggered when you feel pain? Fight, flight, freeze. And so be prepared for that. So early recovery brings with it things that trigger you in the process of trying to get better. And it's pain stuff. And so your brain, remember, it doesn't like pain. So you start to get these triggers and your brain goes, option A, relapse. And you go, no, I don't want to go to option A. Option B, go out and get a girlfriend and get laid. That'll fix up your pain problem. Some of you will give into that one. Some of you say, I don't want to go there. You'll go option C, start eating lots of food. And you'll just go to another addiction, another activity. And so what happens in early recovery is you cross-addict because of pain. Your brain is saying, I can't go back to the old option, option A, but I got other options I'm going to start thinking about because they're going to numb my pain. So, early recovery, highly dangerous time. You need a lot of support. You need a lot of protection of yourself and awareness of just how vulnerable you are. And so part of what you need to learn as a tool when you get triggered is de-escalating all of those powerful emotions and grounding yourself over and over. And that is going to be a very important tool, and you'll hear me talk about that a lot in this series. I want you to understand another thing about pain. I think a lot of people in recovery come into it out of a life of pain and complex trauma, and they develop the unrealistic expectation that if they do their recovery well, it will result in a pain-free life. It doesn't. That's an unrealistic, irrational expectation. Here's what will happen though. You will learn as you get healthier how to manage pain and experience joy in the midst of painful circumstances and events. That's what you're working towards. So you'll still go through pain. Most of it you'll be able to resolve because you'll have tools. Some of it you'll have to sit in, but in sitting in it, you'll know how to experience joy in the middle of that. That's the reality piece. Next piece, I've already said it, but I want to emphasize it. Part of what I think is so important for people in early recovery is to have somebody they can talk to when they're in pain. Somebody that they can talk honestly about what they're feeling, the flashback they've just had, the memory. And what you find as you talk is usually the other person, they get it. They've been through something similar, and they validate you, and they encourage you and comfort you, and that's really important. But beyond that, as you share, it's like your load gets lighter. It's like you get it out, and it's therapeutic and healing to do that. So really keep that in mind as you start the recovery journey. I need someone that I can go to when that pain gets triggered to help me through that. The next thing, pain when we get triggered, it changes our expectations of ourselves, of others, and it makes them unrealistic. So just think of the last time you got triggered and you were in pain. Here's what I would do at an earlier stage in my life. I would immediately want Kim, my wife, to come in and fix it, or to carry all the extra stresses of my life, because now everything's overwhelming, and I would have been very demanding, and I would have been really angry if she didn't step up to the plate and get me through this. So as soon as we're in pain, our expectations of those we love goes up and often becomes unreasonable. Next thing, we often, when we're in pain, think, or our brain goes to, there's got to be a magic solution out there somewhere. And so you go back on the internet looking for the quick fix, the magic pill, and it's easy to put a lot of energy into looking for that, but it's not available. And then pain causes our thinking to get distorted. So let me give you an example. Let's say you've been going along for 2 weeks and everything's been going well. It's been best 2 weeks of your life. Then you hit 2 crappy days. What does your brain tend to do? Your brain goes, my whole life sucks. You forget about those 2 weeks. It's like from birth till now, every day has sucked. That's what you do. So pain causes us to get distorted. And what do we distort? We start to focus on the negative. We start to see more negative than positive. And it actually makes things worse. So be very aware of what happens in your thinking when you're in pain about the distortions and the lies that you believe with that. And then for many people, they find that a spiritual connection is very helpful to them in dealing with pain. Now, I want to give you one more thing about pain. Pain is a part of growth. I don't know if you grew up when you had a growth spurt and you would get pain in your joints, or your kids went through that, growing pains. I always used to laugh at guys that would come to Tamarack, and of course the first thing they want to do is get their membership at the Y and start pumping iron again and getting back in shape. And they'd come home after their first workout and they're and the next morning they're in pain. Do you want to know what I saw with those guys? Yeah, they were in pain and they griped and complained. They were excited because their muscles were getting back in shape and they were getting healthy again. But they realized to get from being in bad shape to good shape, you had to go through pain. And they accepted that as part of growth. So I want to give you a couple examples. That's an oyster. Do you know how an oyster gets made? You got this oyster shell and a little bit of dirt, sand, at the bottom of the ocean sneaks in to the inside of the shell. And it irritates it. It just bugs it. It's pain. And it doesn't like it. So guess what it does? It secretes a mucus. Call it snot, whatever you want to call it. But it secretes it and it forms around the sand. But it still bugs it a little bit, so it secretes a bit more. That's where you get a pearl. It's all started with a grain of sand that was a pain to an oyster. And that's how they resolved it. So what I have found in my own life, it's usually the pain things in my life that lead to the greatest growth in my life. And that's the way it should be. Next one. I worked before, this is going back, 1980, I started working for General Motors in Oshawa, Ontario. And they sent me to work for a little while in the battery plant. In the battery plant, you got this huge furnace where they boil the lead. That's what you make the batteries out of. So I go by, and it's like 1,000 degrees. And I go by, and what they did is it boils the lead, and all of the impurities in the lead rise to the surface. And a guy would be there to scrape off the impurities. Then they leave it for a while in the heat, and it'd boil up more impurities, and pretty soon you had 99.9% pure lead. That's the way we work. We're not ready to give up impurities until it hurts, until the heat gets turned up. And it kind of brings them to the surface and you go, am I going to deal with this or not? And we hopefully scrape it off and we get better for it. Better quality. But it takes heat. Last one. Charcoal diamond. I hope you all realize diamonds came from charcoal. I looked it up to see how charcoal turns into a diamond. It has to have, and I can't remember, but it has to be at a temperature of over 1,000 degrees with pressure at the same time, which is thousands and thousands pressure per square inch with that heat for hundreds of years. And what actually happens is the coal, under that extreme heat and pressure, the DNA changes and it becomes a diamond. You want to know what's interesting to me? They're starting to realize that people who've been traumatized, their DNA actually changes a little bit because of the trauma. And so that is interesting to me, because now what I want you to think about is, how do we change for the better? Pressure, heat, period of time. And then we say, DNA changed so that I'm a more loving person. DNA changed so that I'm more honest, more responsible. Funny though that we need heat and pressure, isn't it? So pain we can resolve, but I want you to understand pain can serve a great purpose in pushing us to grow, in making us better and better. So here's where I want to go tonight in our time with the Christian portion. We've been talking about a relationship with God, and that a relationship with God, it involves surrender, it involves trust, and we've been developing that. So I want to continue that a little bit tonight with another thing that the Bible uses to describe what that looks like. And then I want to bring in this whole pain piece and try to blend that in as well. So what I'm going to do is use a metaphor or a picture that the Bible uses about our relationship with God called a potter and the clay. I don't know if you've ever been to a place where pottery is made and watched them make pottery. I've been to one and it's just fascinating. But let me start by reading 2 verses from the Bible and then I'll develop it for you. So both are from Isaiah, which is a book in the first part of your Bible, and it says this. This is a piece of clay, or this is Isaiah talking to people. How foolish can you be? He's talking to us. He is the potter, that's God, and He's certainly greater than you, the clay. So God's the potter, we're the clay. Should the created thing say to the one that made it? So you picture yourself on the wheel being spun and you're mouthing off at the potter and you're saying, he didn't make me. Does a jar ever say the potter who made me is stupid? But he's saying that's what you do to God. You sit there saying you could have done a better job, you're stupid, all of those things. Then another one says this. What sorrow awaits those who argue with their Creator? So here's what some of us did. We said, God, you're stupid. You didn't do a very good job. I'm getting off of this pottery wheel, and I'm going to do it myself. Thank you very much. And so he says, sorrow awaits that kind of pot. Does a clay pot argue with its maker? Does the clay dispute with the one who shapes it, saying, stop, you're doing it wrong? Does this pot exclaim, how clumsy can you be? And so he is saying, this metaphor of God as the potter and us as the clay is actually a wonderful metaphor for our relationship with God. Because there's a lot of times we don't like how He's shaping our lives. There's a lot of times we want to complain to Him, and we probably do, about the job that He's doing. Sometimes when I work with clients, they start to get in touch with the fact that they got resentments and they're very angry people. And so they talk about all the resentments they have towards other people. And then I say, let me see if you got resentments in 2 other areas. Do you have a resentment at yourself? They stop and they go, yeah, I got a big resentment towards myself. And I go, do you have a resentment against God? And they go, I don't think so. And I go, are you totally happy with kind of what God's done in your life? Oh, now I get what you're saying. And so a lot of people have almost a hidden resentment against God. So what I wanted to do is just take you very quickly through the process of making a lump of clay into a beautiful pot or a vase or whatever. And what I want you to be alert to is how pain is part of that process almost the whole way, in very different ways and with different results. So the first thing, they choose a lump of clay. And I guess there's quite a science to how they choose clay and what they know how to do, but that's where they start. Then they knead the clay. So if you grew up with a mother who made homemade bread, she'd knead the dough. And what you're doing there is you're kneading out all the air, But more than that, there's a couple other things that happen. It's making all the clay even. So there might be kind of a hard lump in a spot. You want to get that softened. You might have one part that's just bigger as far as that part of the clay that you want to make the same size. So you knead it and knead it. But there's a third reason why they knead it. And they call it making the clay willing. And what it does is as they knead it, they stimulate all the clay's DNA. They stimulate the molecules inside of the clay. And what happens when those molecules get stimulated, it makes them receptive to being shaped. So if they didn't need that and stimulate or make the clay willing, they'd try to form it into a pot and it wouldn't hold its shape. And it wouldn't cooperate very well. And so I was thinking about that. I think God has to work in many addicts' life for years, needing them to make them willing. Some of you have been there for 10, 20 years of God needing and needing, saying, are you willing yet? Are you willing to be shaped yet? Now, if you're clay, and clay has feelings, I don't imagine kneading is a whole lot of fun. I don't think they're saying, yay, Potter, I'm loving this. They're going, ouch, that hurts. You're putting pressure on me. You're squeezing me. I'm not liking this. But it's making them willing. And so pain is often God's tool in making us willing to be shaped in a new way. And then they stick it on the middle of the bowl and they begin to center the clay. So they put their fingers in and start making a hole. And then after that, they begin to shape or mold the whole clay into the pot. So it's called throwing a bowl. And that's where they put all this pressure in different areas. And this clay begins to take shape, gets narrow, it gets big. They go in the middle and they kind of carve it out in the middle as it's spinning and spinning. But here's what I want you to understand. How do you shape that into that beautiful pot? Pressure. Pressure, pressure, different places, different parts of the pot, but it's pressure. And then once they get the pot done, then they have to trim it. And that hurts because they get a knife out and they now have to make the edges even so that the pot will sit on the table and not wobble. And then after it's trimmed and the shape is all there, now it goes in the furnace. And it's called firing the clay. And they bake it. And it is hot. And then after they've fired the clay and the clay then is kind of solidified into that shape, it now is solid. Then they take it out, let it cool down, and they can paint it or glaze it. That makes it waterproof. That gives it a nice shine. That helps it be protected from the elements. And they can paint designs and make it beautiful. Once they got it glazed and painted, back in the oven. They had to fire it again to seal the glaze and the paint into place. Then you have a finished pot. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So stop and think about that. Everything about that process was painful if you're a hunk of clay. Many hunks of clay would probably say, let me go back in the ground and just be a lump. That's a lot more fun than this becoming a pretty pot. But it's a painful process. I think there would be times the clay would think the potter's a sadistic person who likes to be cruel. And I think sometimes we think God's that way. We think God just somehow likes being cruel by causing us pain. And we don't realize He's trying to shape us into something beautiful. And now here's the trust part. In order for that lump of clay to get to be that beautiful pot, it has to trust the wisdom of the potter. It's got to trust that the potter is smart and wise enough to know how much pressure to put on it, how long to keep it in the fire before it takes it out. It has to turn its whole will and life over to the potter And that only works if you trust the potter. So what I want you to understand is this. A relationship with God is a friendship, of course, but it is a potter wanting to shape us into something beautiful. And that will at times feel painful and even cruel. And so we have to trust the wisdom and love of our potter. Now there's one other scenario that I am so glad it gets talked about in the Bible, because to me it describes addicts. So follow, Jeremiah writes this. The Lord gave me another message to Jeremiah. He said, go down to the potter's shop, and I will speak to you there. So I did as he told me, and found the potter working at his wheel. So he's making a pot. But the jar he was making did not turn out like he hoped. So he's maybe hoping to make this fine piece of china, and it just wasn't taking the shape, and it was getting to be a bit of an ugly pot. So he crushed it into a lump again and started over. And so the beauty is, sometimes the potter's working on a pot and the product isn't what he was hoping for. He doesn't just throw it on the garbage heap. He crushes it and starts all over again. So here's what God says. The Lord gave this message. O Israel, you can put your name there. Can I not do to you as this potter has done to his clay? As the clay in the potter's hand, so you are in my hand. If I announce that a certain nation or kingdom is to be uprooted, torn down, destroyed, but then that nation renounces its evil ways, I will not destroy it as I had planned. What God is saying is this. I started making your life and you made a mess of it. I could have easily just said, you're gone. You blew it. I don't work that way. If you're willing, I'm going to crush you down to a lump of clay again. And I'm going to start all over. And this time we're going to get it right. And that is the beauty of the potter that the Bible describes. He is the potter of second chances. He's the potter of third, fourth, fifth chances. And he will go through times with us where he says, okay, let's start all over. Now there's a part there that I want you to understand. When he says, let's start over, there's a crushing process. There's a part that everything you were building didn't turn out. It's all got to be uprooted. It's got to be crushed, and we don't like that part. And that's why for many people, one way to describe that surrender to God is that your will finally gets broken. And you say, God, it's a mess. I did a terrible thing, but it's all yours. Please remake me. And there's a feeling of brokenness there. There's a feeling of just totally being a lump of clay. Painful, but God doesn't sit there and say, I got to punish you for a while. He says, I am so glad you're going to trust me this time. Let's start again. And so recovery for people following God is learning how to stay on the potter's wheel and trust Him and letting Him make something beautiful. My daughter Britt, who just left today for Surrey, her favorite verse in the Bible for many years was this. He gives beauty for ashes and He gives joy for sorrow. And here's what the image was in that culture. If you had somebody die and you were in grief, you would go sit on an ash heap and you would throw ashes in the air and they'd land all over you, and so you'd be covered in black ashes. And it was a symbol of how black you felt inside. So today people wear black at funerals. Then you covered yourself in ashes. And so what Isaiah is saying in that verse, he gives beauty for ashes. So he pictures you sitting on an ash heap saying, my life's a mess, I've blown it, I've got nothing but loss, nothing but grief. And God says, I want to give you beauty for those ashes. I want to take all of that loss, take all of that mess, all of that ugliness, and bring beauty out of it. And that is the joy that I get on a weekly basis. I get to watch people on the potter's wheel. And I get to watch them complain and cry and be in pain and say, I don't like this, but they stay on the potter's wheel. And then by the end of the week, they got a smile on their face because they say, I think I see some beauty coming out of these ashes. I think I see some beauty coming out of this lump of clay. And that is what God does. And so we've all blown it at times. Maybe right now it's really fresh with you. I really pray that you can just trust the potter and let him reshape your life into something beautiful. Let's